who is an NBA player that you grew up respecting, but also just hating?
It's got to be Chris Paul.
And that's crazy because I loved Chris Paul growing up.
Yeah, it had less to do with who he was. No, it had something to do with who he was, but it was mostly because Steve Nash was my favorite player ever, and it was just sparked up the discourse between Nash and the Chris Paul, who ran the better offense, so that's why I just couldn't appreciate his game until I was like, you know what, I don't care. Like when Steve Nash retired, I was able to enjoy Chris Paul as a player for a little bit, and then even then, I just didn't like some of the foul baiting stuff that he was doing. But I give him credit because he's super intelligent player, so he's able to get away, or was able to do certain. He basically he's the ultimate winner. I know he hasn't won, but he does whatever it takes to win. I'm glad I grew out of that phase though, because definitely early on, me as a basketball fan, I did not like Chris Paul. I don't know. Not my favorite player to watch, not my favorite player to root for. Only reason I really even liked some of those teams was Peja was one of my favorite players in the league at the time. So when he was with the they were the Charlotte Hornets at the time.
At that time, it was New Orleans.
The New Orleans Hornets. Yeah, the New Orleans Hornets. Yeah, when he was in New Orleans with the Hornets at the time, I was just not the biggest fan of him. Even during his Clippers stint, wasn't really a big fan of him. I can say I started coming around to Chris Paul realistically towards the end of his Clippers days and OKC. That is the turning point, in my opinion, of him as a player. Is I can hate this man because he had some talent on just about every single one of those teams he got to. At some point, he had some significant talent, but that was the first time in his career where, for better or for worse, it was kind of just him out there in terms of like known bodies or known commodities in the league at the time. He was clear cut. It was him. So I was like, you know what? We'll see. And he changed my mind about him. He was sensational that year. Really helped Shai's development just in general. Help be a bridge to, from one era to the next era, and just super underappreciated in that aspect. But definitely some guy took me a couple years to get to get some kind of liking behind him. Even to this day, I'm not that big a fan, but it is what it is.
Yeah, Chris Paul don't get the credit he deserved for OKC never falling off, because that was the year they were supposed to. That was the year, horrible. And he also got left out there for dead, and it just didn't work out that way. They ended up in a play-in. No, play-in. I don't think the play-in was. No, there was a play-in. I think because of the bubble, right?
Yes, I think they made the playoffs that year.
Yeah, they made the playoffs. I think the play-in they brought in the next year, but. Yeah, he don't get enough credit because that team was supposed to really rebuild, and him going down there, and because Shai wasn't Shai yet either, him going down there and refusing to lose really kept life in OKC. And it's crazy that's your player, because Chris Paul was literally one of my favorite players growing up.
It was because one of my best friends at the time, he was the biggest Chris Paul fan, and he would just clown Steve Nash for whatever reason, just because he had the MVPs and CP didn't. Yeah. So it was just it wasn't as much me forcing, me not liking the player at times. It was just me wanting him to be wrong. What I'm saying? But it did grow to me oh no, he's a little overrated or whatever. But I've came full circle.
Yeah, I enjoyed Chris Paul in LA, but I was a real big fan of Hornets Chris Paul. Because I saw, a lot of people don't remember how fun Chris Paul was his rookie year.
No.
And beyond that. And also, I was a real big fan of Tyson Chandler before he got to New Orleans. And so seeing that dynamic and seeing Tyson Chandler finally really break out was a lot of fun for me. But my player who I grew up respecting but not liking at all, and I'm going to have to explain it, but it was 100%, it was Kobe Bryant. Respected his game, and actually, I was a big fan of him until the Heat traded for Shaq and that rivalry started. And then D-Wade started to become one of the best shooting guards in the league, and I'm a D-Wade fan. I grew up idolizing D-Wade, so it got to a point to me where Kobe was just kind of in the way.
Yep.
Like we made that a debate when it probably really shouldn't have been, to be honest. Talking about D-Wade's efficiency versus Kobe's and all that stuff. And so I spent a lot of Kobe's career rooting against him, I mean. And that kind of is a sign of respect in itself, because you don't take the time to do all that for a player you think is bad.
Exactly. 100%.
But once Kobe retired was when I realized I actually had been a fan the whole time. Not when he passed away, but when he retired. And I didn't have to think about the competitive stuff anymore and like putting him against D-Wade or whatever it is. Then I really got to go back and realize a lot of my arguments against him actually didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like talking about his shot selection, but like I go back and I watch these games now and it's like he was making those.
Yeah.
Like those turnaround fadeaways over three people, like they were going in. How mad can I really be at that? Like,
yeah. No, yeah, for sure. And it's funny that both of the players that we pick is because of an idolization of another player and people pinning them against our, idolized players. So within, like you said, within itself, it's just a sign of respect.
Absolutely. And it's just like, I'm glad I grew out of that phase. And you said you also did.
Yeah,
because
sure.
there's a lot of great players in the league. And I understand there's still rivalries. People, for whatever reason, still consider the Knicks the Heat's rival. I don't think they necessarily have been since the 90s, but I'm able to show respect to Jaylen Brown. Not Jaylen Brown. Well, Jaylen Brown also, because the Knicks, the Celtics are also the Heat's rival. But I can show a lot of respect to Jalen Brunson because
For sure.
he's a great player, and I don't really care about the rivalry that much. Jaylen Brown, same thing. People make the left hand jokes, but he's a good player. Jason Tatum, I don't know how I'd be somebody who can grow up with Tracy McGrady, is one of my favorite players, and then look at Jason Tatum and be like, nah, he's not that good. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Playoff Foul. I'm Kenny. No Frankie today. He has some stuff to do. He'll be back soon. But I got Lou with me. Lou, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How's it been, man?
My sleep schedule is backwards because I stay up all night editing this. So for the people out there, subscribe wherever you either listen or watch and make our hard work pay off, because it is a lot of hard work. I am going to go to sleep as soon as we get off here and then wake up in the middle of the night to edit this episode. So that gives you an example. But we're going to go ahead and get into this episode. So what we're going to do is we're going to each choose a guard, a wing, and a big that's loved by some, hated by some. We're going to kind of get into why that is. And we're going to get into the numbers and all that good stuff. So we're going to start with the guards first. Lou, who's your guard? This is very polarizing.
So, first of all, we got to acknowledge some guards. I feel like guards is by far the most polarizing position, probably in all of. Like, it was the easiest one to pick, like, because you had a plethora of people to pick from. The guy I decided to go with was Kyrie Irving.
Man,
talk about polarizing NBA players. I think it starts with Kyrie Irving.
Mm-hmm.
Not just. Obviously the on the court stuff, but even off the court, which we're not going to talk about here, but just from this, purely from the on the court stuff, a lot of people seem to believe that he is just not good enough to be a number one, or he's not good enough to win by himself. First of all, whoever says that, out the window. I apologize. Nobody's ever good enough to win by themselves.
Right. There's no such thing.
It's a team game. But what they fail to acknowledge is that being able to sacrifice to this level to let other players who you might be on par with, sometimes he's been better than, whatever. I'm not here to, obviously not the LeBron, but his stint in Boston, probably not better than Luka, but just him being able to realize this as one of the highest, the most highly touted players coming out of Duke, that like this was like YouTube mixtapes was everything Kyrie all the time. because he was just that talented. Him being able to get all these labels and just literally block out the noise and go and contribute and be the team's second best player offensively at all times, while this season in particular, like accommodating to the star is a skill within itself. And he's shown that he literally has done that his whole fucking career. Yeah. And that's not easy. Like, it takes players years to accommodate. He did it from day one. As soon as LeBron got there, he knew his role. Gets traded, now we're going to fast forward, gets traded to Dallas. Luka's there, knows his role. And it's just, it's polarizing because a lot of hate is brought upon him. Some of it is not justified. His shot selection, dude, I don't want to hear that, to be very honest, particularly with him, because he's ultra fucking efficient. Right. This year, he's putting up damn near 26 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, shooting 49% from the field for a guard.
6'3" guard.
That you're probably being generous with the 6'3", but 6'3" guard. 49% from the field, 42% from 3, and damn near 90% from the free throw line at 88.5%. So he's almost 50, 40, 90. And efficiency creeps up with this guy. Are we fucking kidding? Like, let's keep it honest, man. Like, he's one of the most skilled players that has literally ever graced a basketball court. Yeah. But we have to nitpick something. We have to hate on something for his greatness to be, my opinion, to not be respected or valued, I guess. Like, we take Kyrie Irving for granted is why I think he's so polarizing. Some people would just bang the table for, like, he's not this good, he's not whatever, but he's been sensational this year and has accommodated his game in several ways, like I said, to his star, but particularly this season has the highest percent of his shots are assisted this year. Yeah. So completely changing his role from, I don't know if you remember, Kenny, but when he went to Brooklyn, the first time when he was by himself, before that 20-game
stretch, was hoping.
That 20-game stretch when Kyrie was Kyrie before he got hurt, that was menace level activity every day on the court. He was how I liked it. He was on one every time down the court. You knew it was him. Try to stop him, and you still couldn't. And this year, it's like I feel like he's recognized, this is the way that they're going to win. The team has been very good when he's been on the court. It's a 9-point difference when he's on versus when he's off the court. That's how much he means to this team. Filled his role in perfectly next to Luka. He's been the perfect Robin to the Batman several times in his career, and that gets underappreciated. That's definitely my first pick for polarizing guards.
And you know what? I think aside from the off-court stuff, like I said, we're not really, like you said, we're not really going to touch on that. But the on-court stuff, I feel like it's just, he's one of those unfortunate casualties of the LeBron/GOAT, quote-unquote, conversation, where there's people who just have to discredit everybody LeBron ever played with to make LeBron
that much
whatever.
Better.
LeBron's great enough. He doesn't need all that. But people feel the need to do it. And so, but I do want to also expound on your point about Kyrie accepting his role, because obviously in Cleveland as a young player, you're not going to win. You're not going to carry that kind of team that young. LeBron comes back. He takes there were two Batmans. There were two Batmans. I don't want to discredit Kyrie in any way. There were two Batmans. But he also understood this is LeBron James. LeBron's going to run this offense a whole bunch, and that's the best thing for the team. He ends up getting traded to Boston, and he takes on he wasn't even that old yet, but he took on the veteran role, taking the young guys under his wing. And there were stories and stuff about the locker room not liking him, whatever it is, but all those players speak on Kyrie highly. So I feel like that's one of those things where, like, the media perception and his teammates' perceptions are polar opposites. I feel like Kyrie gets himself into a lot of stuff, but there's also a lot of media narratives that get made up about him. And I feel like whatever happened in Boston is one of those things. Then he goes to Brooklyn, and he's with KD. Like you said, he's going crazy at first. KD comes back. Him, KD, and James Harden don't play a lot together, but when they do, he's also sacrificing his shots and all this stuff. And now he goes to the Mavs, and you see every former Maverick is, I wasn't getting the ball enough, and just hinting at Luka having too much control of the offense. You got Kyrie Irving, who's going into the Hall of Fame, making the best of it, and like you said, putting up incredible numbers. And so I do want to also give Kyrie credit for that. I understand he rubs people the wrong way with some of his off the court stuff, and not only the controversial stuff, but just his spirituality in general. People like to make fun of him for like all that stuff. We only care about basketball on the show. And so as far as we're both concerned, Kyrie is a great player. Now, my player who I chose, my guard, he's not a Kyrie level player. I'm not going to sit here and say that. But he is the player who, and I'm going home for this for the people who don't know. He is a player who has, I don't know if underrated is even a word. It just gets very weird with him. There's expectations for him that I've never seen before. But my guard is Tyler Herro. I understand I sound like a biased Heat fan right now, but just hear me out. We're talking about somebody who came into the league as a 13th pick.
Yep.
As a 13th overall pick. The team trades for Jimmy Butler right away. They're in win now mode. We're talking about somebody who on an Eric Spoelstra coach team was playing young and was trusted young and came up big in clutch situations. Ends up winning the Sixth Man of the Year award. The talk that year was, does he even really need to still be on the bench at this point? Like he's kind of dominating in that role. That was split. I was on the side of he should start. Off season comes, Pat Riley says he wants to start because he said he didn't want to be a sixth man forever, which guys get typecast in that role and don't make a whole bunch of money. So nobody should feel comfortable in that role, especially that young. They should want more for themselves. That was a controversial thing for some reason. Then he gets a starting job after Pat Riley said he earned it. And the talk leading into that season was, well, he doesn't play well with the starters. Why, whatever. He comes and puts up pretty much the exact same numbers that he did the year before, but in a starting role with Jimmy Butler and with Bam Adebayo. But there's just been he's just had a long career of just not getting any credit. And I think I don't need players to get credit, but we also have to be truthful when we criticize players. Like we're talking about somebody who in his second year in a row now. Actually, no. This year he's at shooting splits are 44, 40, 84, which is very good. Last year it was, I want to say 44, 38, 93. This is not inefficient. I don't know what world this is inefficient in. I guess if you look at the field goal attempts and points, they're pretty close, but he has to get to the line more. And that's not something I'm going to take away from. I'm not going to criticize him. I'm not going to pretend that's not a thing that he probably should do. But it's also not a big deal. For me, it's not a big deal. It helps. It makes you more efficient. It helps you put points on the board when the clock is stopped. But I honestly don't care that much about it. Still not an amazing defender, but definitely improved. Because his first couple of years, you were scoring on him every time.
Yep.
Every single time. And that's not the case now. Playmaking has improved. And I just think also there's the point of the team getting far without him in the playoffs multiple times. But past 2 years, the series they got eliminated in, they really needed somebody who could step up and score. And so I just think for me, man, like I said, I don't need players to just get credit, but I think we do have to also be truthful if we're going to criticize players. And I don't think the criticism of Tyler Herro has ever really been 100% truthful, or just the expectations were weird. Like, we expect him to be a 3-level scorer, even though that's not a very common thing. We expect him to average 25, even though that's just not how Eric Spoelstra plays with his teams. And it's I know you're also a Heat fan, so you have something to say, but my basic point with Tyler Herro is criticism is fair as long as it's truthful, and it's just almost never truthful.
I think you hit it right on the button when you said expectations is what makes him polarizing. Mm-hmm. In a vacuum, people would take him. Yeah. You know, it's just I don't know. I think it's just the amount where they want him to get to is unfair due to who he's been linked with in terms of trades. I think that's where the narrative stems from. I think the narrative stems from him being involved or his name being thrown around in just about every major trade that has happened recently, whether that was James Harden when he asked out of Houston, Donovan Mitchell, when Durant was doing his little thing, like just in general, every single trade involves Tyler Herro. So his expectations come not just from his own playing time, his own personal value, but therefore linked to a comparison of these other players.
Yeah.
So, which, first of all, for his name to be involved in these trades as the centerpiece says a lot. Ridiculously young. He started doing this at 19. His first year, 24 years old right now. So he's still young, but he's a vet now. I think it's super interesting because, I understand where people come from, the inefficient stuff or the talk about it. I don't particularly agree with everything they say. I don't disagree with everything they say. I just think everybody wants to make it an extreme and they want to be right.
Right.
Most times in life, it doesn't go to those extremes. Somewhere in the middle. It's a compromise. Like it's how life works. This is exactly what it is. And sometimes it just gets overblown in one or the other direction. And I try to stay away from it, which is why he's polarizing. Like, come on, like this is the definition of polarizing, is on two opposite ends of the spectrum. And, I think he fits this perfectly. I do think that some of his tendencies have been not the best sometimes, but I do think that he has improved, particularly as of late. If we want to get real into it, after the Heat's like 7-8 game losing streak, the longest ever under Eric Spoelstra, they held a team meeting. Different Tyler Herro. Yeah. A lot of credit for that. For somebody who's 24, still young. I know he's a vet, but he's still like 24 is still young. Like 15 years ago, 24-year-olds were the sophomore year in the league. Like realistically, very few, as young as him, but just completely being able to change his game. And some of the frustration with him not getting to the line is warranted. I do think that is warranted because I would like for him. I think he would like to get to the line more. Let's keep it 100. Like, it's not like he's not trying to get to the free throw line. It's just probably not his style of game. But all of that, like his weaknesses take away from what his strengths are. And his strengths are tough shot making when needed. And say what you want to say, man. He's one of the best catch and shoot shooters in the league. I don't have the stats with me. Eye test tells me if he's catching and shooting, feeder set, probably not missing.
The truth be told, not to cut you off, but feet not set. That fading all the way into the corner. And to that point, when he came into the league, that was not in his arsenal whatsoever. Right. He would airball those shots or bad misses. So he's definitely improved. I don't think he's all the way there as a movement shooter, but he's improved his game. I think his playmaking has came a long way. It's just how often can he tap into that? But a very good rebounder for his position, for his size, just in general, helps a ton on the defensive glass. His effort's been there defensively. To be honest, just about every year. Yeah. It's just, physical limitations. Sometimes he's asked to guard certain people where probably not ideal. And it's the NBA, man. There's some good, there's some talent in this league. So it's not easy, but definitely super polarizing. I'm glad you brought him up because obviously it hits home. Yeah. And I think to expound on your point about expectations, it's also with the Heat having championship expectations.
Absolutely.
But there's also just like, we probably shouldn't keep ignoring his contributions to how good the team is as far as being contenders. They especially last season, they do not come closer to playing without Tyler Herro. He was one of the best clutch players in the league. as much as national media mourned the loss of Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, they mostly didn't play well last season. It was a lot of Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler, and then Caleb at times. So flashes of what he would end up doing in the playoffs. But my main point with all this, and I'm going to keep saying it, is just let's be critical, but let's also be truthful. When we talk about not only his expectations as far as winning, but as far as his expectations as a player, he has shortcomings. Like we mentioned, the defense, which I don't make that big of a deal of because I understand he's not a great on-ball defender, but as a team, and defense is a team concept, the Heat have been one of the best defenses in the league pretty much the entire time he's been there. And that's not giving him credit for it, but it's just like it's not hurting as much as the picture may be painted that it is.
Correct.
But as far as that goes, as far as his development with the playmaking and all that stuff, we do kind of have to remember he just turned 24 and didn't come into the league like in a position like a Cade Cunningham or somebody who went to a bad team with no expectations and just had the ball in the hands to make a bunch of mistakes. This is somebody who came into a championship contender with championship expectations. If you're struggling, it's Jimmy Butler's turn. We need to win this game. We need to worry about seeding. We need to worry about all this stuff. So there are, I guess, quote unquote, better players I could have chose for this, but we're Miami Heat fans, and these are conversations we end up having often anyway.
Absolutely.
But I just felt like this is somebody we needed to shed light on because the expectations and the criticism of him, like I said, just doesn't make a ton of sense. Like a couple of years ago, like he announced his first child and he was like 21 years old or something. And that was controversial. Like weird stuff like that. Like we don't need to do that. We don't need to like hone in on if he has 2 turnovers in a game. But he had 8 assists and 24 points. Hone in on these turnovers. And yeah, he had a near triple double when the team won, but why is he dribbling so much? Like it gets dumb. It gets dumb. Who is the wing you feel like deserves more? Well, is polarizing.
Yeah. The key word is polarizing.
Yeah.
And I will be fully transparent with everybody. I think this was the hardest position for me to come into terms with. Yeah. It took me a lot longer coming up with a wing than it did coming up with a guard or a big. But I ultimately settled on the guy who makes the most money starting next year. The biggest contract in the NBA. How can that not be polarizing? Like he's number 1 in paid and he's not the best player in the league. I'm talking about Jaylen Brown. For those of you who don't know. Where do we start with Jaylen Brown? He's been made a meme.
Yeah.
The left hand jokes. Some of it has been warranted again. You know, we're not here to, you know, if it's a meme, honestly, it's probably for a reason. It's just overblown, but it's probably for a reason. Yeah. I think what makes him so polarizing is the fact that so he's been in what's been a winning team that hasn't won. I also could have gone with his teammate, if I'm being very honest, which is Jason Tatum. I chose him in particular, though, because I think the criticism sometimes with him is he good enough to be the second guy? Is he not good enough to be the second guy? Everybody harps on his weaknesses, which is obvious. It's his left hand, sometimes his creation for others. But I do think this year in particular, he's gotten better, at least with the playmaking for others part. They're playing more of a team concept. Before that really wasn't the case before Mazzulla got there. I got to give Mazzulla credit because he gets fucking flamed, and I think he's a great head coach. So shout out to Mazzulla. But just in general, Jaylen Brown averaging 22, 5.5, 4 assists, 49, 35 splits. His free throw shooting is taking a dip, but, you know, still 22 points on the best team in the league, being their second option offensively. 2A, 2B with Porzingis. Last year put up 27 a game. Like, we know what he's been. And for him to be, again, it's crazy that we're talking about these players and he's been in the league for, it's felt like 8 seasons now. Maybe it could be more, I believe. Yeah, about 8 seasons. and he's still 27 years old.
Yeah.
But his expectations sometimes are so above and beyond everybody else just because of the caliber of team he's on and the fact that he has not won a championship. Some of it, and again, people like to point fingers and whatever it may be, but he didn't particularly struggle when they made it to the finals. So he struggled last year. We can get into that if you want, but it was a lot of just not making shots. But just in general, I think he's a very polarizing player. I do think some of this stuff is warranted, as tends to be the case. But I do think he's underappreciated in how good he is. And now the criticism before was always strong. And 2-3 years ago, people were having conversations if they should go Jason Tatum or if they should go Jaylen Brown. So that's how much the spectrum has like that's how much of a polarizing player he is. Like 2 years ago, everybody was, damn, is it him or is it Tatum? Like, who's the guy? Some people were saying Jaylen Brown.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, they can't win with him as a second option because he doesn't have a left hand, or his shooting sometimes isn't good enough. His playmaking is not good enough. He doesn't know what to do when he gets doubled. Certain things that it's super interesting to see this narrative on both sides. But now when you bring in the big magnifying glass, which is the biggest contract in the league, in league history, when that gets attached to his name, that magnifying glass just got that much bigger.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
And so with the contract, I'll never make a big deal about what players get paid anyway. And you also don't. We just care about the basketball part of it. But I do want to point out to anybody who may not have that mentality, he's not going to have the biggest contract in the league for long.
For sure.
There was, league history. At one point, Mike Conley had the biggest contract in league history. That's just typically just the first guy who gets a big deal under the new CBA or whatever it is. He'll have the biggest contract in league history. That's just kind of how that pattern goes. And so I never paid attention to that. I'm sure you actually didn't either, because we don't care about what guys get paid. But with Jaylen Brown, it's interesting because he's a prime example of not all basketball fans do this, but a lot of people just instead of watching the games and really paying attention to what guys do, they'll let other people's perception of a player control what their perception is. And so, for one, Jaylen Brown is far from the only player in the NBA who doesn't have a left hand.
Exactly.
Like, there are plenty of players who are on the scouting report make him go left. He's not the only one. It's just a couple videos went around of him struggling to dribble with it. And that's kind of really, I noticed, when the tide changed as far as is it him or Tatum or whatever, could he be the second option? That's kind of when the tide changed. And for me, I don't want to say that and criticize people, but that is kind of a little lazy. Because I do think there are times, then there's plenty of games, and we'll be watching. It's like, man, as great as Jason Tatum is, he can't buy a bucket right now.
Absolutely.
But Jaylen Brown is picking up the slack. And now with this year, I think it's easy to look at Jaylen Brown's numbers and see the points are down and all this and stuff down. But you also would have to notice, well, the Celtics go to Kristaps Porzingis in the first quarter. They feed him in the first, and then second, third, and fourth, they just go to everybody else. But so everybody's numbers are going to be down on any team that's really trying to win. And so I just think a lot of it is a lot more complex than people really care to pay attention to it being, because it's easier to make the joke about the left hand. It's easier and it's more spicy to say this player can't be this option on this team, which has never made sense to me. Just like, even when you say a player can't win, a player can't be the best player on a championship team, we never know that until they win a championship.
Exactly.
Like, young Gary Payton had plenty of championship player attributes. He just ran into Michael Jordan. It was, what can you do about that? But I just feel like, and even with us, like, we were pretty hard on Jaylen Brown in the All-Star Weekend episode, but none of it was about his actual play. None of it was about what he does on the floor out there, because, like we both mentioned, he is very important for that Celtics team. We don't even have to really even mention the defense and how valuable he is there. But I 100% agree with you. He just gets a lot of criticism that he probably wouldn't get if more people were just watching the game to watch the game and not watching the game to make jokes.
It feels like, in my opinion, his the reason I ended up going with him over Tatum, it feels like Tatum is almost given more excuses at times than Jaylen Brown is.
100%.
Which I'm not here to say whether that's right or wrong. It's just something I've noticed. So it's the reason why I named him. And like you said, yeah, the numbers are down this year, but like, guys, let's be realistic. This is the most talent that team has had.
Yeah.
So yes, the numbers are going to be down. You know, they're no longer relying on Al Horford and Robert Williams to, you know, be the, you know, the third, fourth options at the time. Like now their third, fourth option is Drew Holiday, Derek White as a fifth option. Like, what are we doing here? Like, the team is incredible. Yes, his numbers are going to be down. It's normal, but it's, you know, there's a reason why, like, they've been in the playoffs literally every year. There's a reason that he was given a contract, which at the time, me, myself said, oof, I don't know if he's worth that money. And I was shut up real quick. When the following year he finally got healthy, he finally got his feet under him, and he started playing how, you know, Jaylen Brown plays. So it's super interesting to see all this, and you know, that's basically why I picked him as a polarizing player. Who did you take though?
I went with somebody who, and it's calmed down now, but this is somebody who was really hated for a couple years, and I don't really understand why. But I went with Paul George. A lot of young players coming into the league's idle, and you'll, and it kind of goes into what I talked about earlier, and I don't want to keep bringing it up, but every time a player comes out and says that they looked up to Paul George or Paul George is their GOAT or whatever it is, everybody gets mad that it's not LeBron. But it's like, you can't be like LeBron. Like, there may never be another LeBron again, but if you're 6'8", 6'9", and you've seen Paul George and you've seen Kevin Durant handling the ball, you see the way Paul George defends, you may want to be like Paul George, because if you're 6'8", 6'9" in high school, and I was in this position at 6'3" in high school, you have your coach probably forcing you to want to get down there and post up, and that's fucking boring. So you look up to Paul George, and with great reason. Paul George, as it stands, is a 6-time All-NBA, 4-time All-Defensive. He led the league in steals in 2019 with 2.2. This season, he has 51, 43, 88 shooting splits. He is shooting, 39% from three on 8.2 attempts. Paul George is very easily one of the best players in the NBA. And I feel like he not only doesn't get the credit for it, because a lot of Western Conference players don't get the credit they deserve because they play late at night for half the country, but the level of criticism he got over the past few years, I never really understood. I
love this pick. Before the show, you told me your place, and I was like, you took Paul, like that was the one. I love this pick. I think he is far and away one of the most polarizing. Like you said, maybe not as much now, but if anybody was around the league 4 or 5 years ago watching basketball, it was frowned upon to like Paul George.
Yeah.
Literally.
It still kind of is.
Playoff P was a thing. Did you guys watch him in the playoffs? Why the fuck was that ever a thing? Like, honestly, did you guys watch Paul George, his second season in OKC?
Every year except for that 1 year with the Clippers.
Yeah.
His game rose in the playoffs.
But just in terms of regular season play, that 2018-2019 year with Oklahoma City,
MVP
Paul George was the best player in basketball for the entire first half of the season. Clip it. I don't give a fuck. Go back and watch the games. I will stand by that to this day. I'm not talking about just offensively. Defensively, shut down. He was defensive player of the year caliber up until he got his shoulder Like he was literally playing with a torn shooting shoulder.
Yeah.
So that's when his stats did. He still put up 28 that year. Like, I think it's so ridiculous when people use a meme like Playoff P to encapsulate this player's career, knowing damn well they fucking shouldn't, because Paul George has been him for a fucking minute. Like, point blank, period. He has been special. Two-way player, special. Every year, one of the league leaders in deflections per 36 minutes, and he's a superstar.
Yep.
Like, he shouldn't have to go out there and defend. He still does it. Every year, his team is in contention or a favorite for whatever reason before the season because he's on the team, because he's one of the top 2-3 best players on this team.
Yeah.
Obviously, sometimes the teams fall short. Injuries are a thing. The NBA is a thing. You never know what's going to happen. But Paul George has been sensational, nothing short of sensational, for a guy who was questioned if he will ever play basketball again after his injury, to have the impact on not just the kids and the generation, but the game in general. People have vividly came out several times and said he's the best two-way guard in the league, the best two-way wing in basketball. All this shit didn't stem from people just liking the guy. Like, no, like, watch the games. Like, he's literally this impactful. He has kept teams afloat that OKC team had no business being that good
at all.
I know Russell Westbrook was there. He took the shine away from Russell Westbrook, and this was when Russ was basically almost putting up triple doubles every game. That's how good he was. It wasn't a matter of who was better at the time. It was Paul George. Like, and I'm a little biased. I watched that team religiously because I was just so curious to see how this fit would work. And I could honestly say that was one of the most dominant seasons I have ever seen from a basketball player on both ends of the court, not just offensively. Obviously, we've seen what Embiid has done, what Jokic has done recently, Luka offensively, but he would literally take games over defensively.
Yeah.
While being one of the highest usage rate players in basketball offensively. Shit you didn't see anymore.
Right.
And I love that you picked him, because by far and away one of my fucking favorite players to just talk about, because I feel like the nonsense is so much that I can just already discredit whether or not you actually watch basketball, whether or not you like Paul George, like whether you think he's overrated or he sucks in the playoffs. Literally just off of that question alone, that's just how I feel. That's how passionate I am about this, man, because I think he's truly, truly elite.
And the thing about, so every time I see conversations about any player really, and it comes up, well, their defense slipped because they have so much responsibility on offense, or you shouldn't really expect them to defend that well anymore because look how much they have to score. The first person who comes to mind is Paul George. Michael Jordan comes second, but he was playing in the 80s and 90s. Paul George is doing it today, right now. And with today's pace, he's, like I said before, he's getting up 8 threes a game. And that may seem like something light. It's difficult to do, and it's tiring. He's also getting to the basket. He's getting to the line. He's playmaking. He's the player who comes to mind to where it's like, you know what? No, I'm not letting that excuse go. Like, get your conditioning right, but you're supposed to play on both ends. Because even still, after all his injuries, especially like not only the one in the Olympics, or that wasn't the Olympics yet, but in international competition, but the shoulder injuries you mentioned, the injuries he's had with the Clippers, watching him now, he still shuts down. And I'm not going to say 1 through 5 because that kind of gets overused. There's very few players who can do that. But 1 through 4, Paul George is shutting you down without question and giving you 30. He scores less this season. He's at 22 points a game this season, but he's sharing with Kawhi. He's sharing with James Harden. Like, that's also another example of when a team's trying to win, guys just score less individually because you have to really play together to get to that level to where you can really be a championship contender. But the Paul George case, I've just never understood. I think it's like you said. I just don't think you can watch Paul George that often if you don't like him as a player, because if you like basketball, this is somebody who has no weaknesses. There's not a like whatever you like about basketball, Paul George can give you, and he can do it well.
Yeah. Minimum at like a B level. Minimum. Like we've seen him play make before because he's had to. We know the type of defensive again, juggernaut he is, particularly out on the wing.
Yeah.
His whole career, honestly, he came into the league as a defender. He wasn't really a scorer like that. Like, just the scoring, obviously, the 3-point shooting, playing above the rim, playing below the rim, getting in lanes, being one of the best on ball defensively at poker ways. It's been the thing with him for his whole. You cannot, if you have a bad dribble, you cannot dribble around him.
Don't play around with the ball with him.
He is a defensive playmaker, but he's also somebody who can go ahead and give you 30 on any given night. Literally averaged 28 for a season, and that 28 is skewed because he just tried to play enough games to try to win the MVP. Yeah. But he was on one shoulder. So it was what it was. Truly sensational player. There's a reason why the kids who are coming up idolize him with good reason. It's not like, they're not going to idolize some guy who's probably not that good. So I definitely love that you brought him up for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so again, I just feel like the reason these young players come up idolizing Paul George is, and just in general, it's like players, coaches, front offices, like they all see the game very different from the way fans do. And I'm not here to shit on fans because we're fans. Like, who will we be to do that? But I just think there has to kind of be a better understanding of, and this is something we say all the time, like the people who do it for a living know a lot more about basketball than we do. And so that's why we take the approach on this show to want to learn and kind of really understand the player's perspective on these things. Because again, like imagine if a Brandon Miller came up like, playoff P, look, he's choking in the playoffs. What kind of player would Brandon Miller be? Would he be Brandon Miller? Would he be in the league right now? Would he be? You never know. And so I think the best approach on these things is just watch the games. Don't let anybody else form your opinion. Like, don't just go for the joke, because truth be told, the jokes don't even be funny most of the time. just at least the approach I take. I just watch the game and let the game tell me what's going on. Who's the big that you feel is very polarizing today that you like?
I definitely love how you basically just transitioned into just, watch the game and let the game tell you. Don't watch the game with preconceived notions of what you're nitpicking. I say all that to say the player I picked for the most polarizing big is Rudy Gobert.
Hell yeah.
There is no possible feasible way you can watch a basketball game and you tell me that he is a liability defensively. That does not exist. He has led a top 5 defensive rating defense more than half of his career. Most of that time, him being, to be honest, almost damn near the sole defender of that defense. 4-time All-NBA, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, 6-time All-NBA defensive, averaging 13, almost 14 points, 13 rebounds, 2 blocks a game. I'm not here to look at his counting stats. I'm here to tell you the Rudy Gobert anchor defense, doesn't matter who the fuck it has around him, will win you enough games to get into the playoffs.
Sure.
He has transformed teams' defense. He did it in Utah. He's doing it right now. They have Minnesota has the number 1 ranked defense. Yeah. I don't want to say all of it is on Rudy Gobert because it's a team game. It's not all on Rudy Gobert. But the reason it works so well is because of his attention to detail. How good there is something that needs to be said for bigs. I don't like to use the word rim protector.
Right.
Sometimes because you can be good at shot blocking, but not good at protecting, like not overall contributing to your defensive scheme.
Right.
Or you can be what I like to call a paint protector. That is literally what Rudy Gobert is. He doesn't just affect shots at the rim. He can do that, and that's great. But his concept of team defense is truly spectacular when you really watch him. Defensively, his intelligence in pick and rolls, his intelligence as a low man when he's on the weak side, how vocal he is defensively, pushing guys to rotations. The other day, I don't know if you saw the clip where he closed out in the corner, contained the ball for 3 seconds, came back across and blocked the shot. Like, the butt of the jokes many times because of what Steph Curry did to him. Are we serious? Like,
look, and I'm not cutting you off.
No, go ahead, please.
If getting crossed up by Steph Curry makes you a bad player, nobody's good.
Let's go, man. Like, come on, keep it a band with us. There's no way Rudy Gobert defensive question marks rise because how good of a defender is he if in the playoffs he can get played off the floor? That is the only team in basketball that could have played that man off the floor. He just happened to play against them. Like, and even then the team was better when he was on the floor, but that's besides the fucking point. It's just, it's obviously very nitpicky sometimes, but there's a reason why literally every defense he's on just happens to be very good. There's a reason why, he's not the best offensive player. He is an elite role player in his role. I don't know if he's a star. I'm not here to argue that. He's a defensive star for sure. Offensively, that's not his game. But I think that's what makes him so polarizing. Some people think he's actually just absolutely terrible offensively. But, I will say offensive rebounding is a skill, and it is on the offensive side. He happens to do that very well. He's actually the active leader in the NBA for true shooting percentage. So for same people who love efficiency, are over here saying he has no business offensively. Yeah, he leads the league in true shooting percentage. Granted, most of his shots are at the rim, but it's just a product of his overall spacing, soft hands, decent touch, lob threat ability, screen ability, roll ability, all these little things that make a great player great. And at the end of the day, he's just a winning player. And that's why I think that's basically how I can just cap off why Rudy Gobert is so polarizing. And
I do think a lot of polarization, one is just like, I think he cried when he didn't make an all-star team. I'm not going to defend that. There was also like the touching the microphones, and then look, most of us had COVID at one point, not knowing we had COVID. Like, it happens. I'm not defending what he did at all, but I mean, is it that big of a deal?
We focus on basketball at the end of the day.
Yeah, we focus on basketball. But as far as the offense stuff, I'm glad you mentioned the offensive rebounds, because it's not everybody's role to score 20. Everybody's not getting plays ran for him. And so we can't really look at Rudy Gobert and say he can't play offense. When he does, he has to get the opportunities for himself with rolling and with getting the offensive rebounds, but he's very effective when he does get those shots up. And so we're on the same page with this. I feel like we're kind of quick to just say a player can't do something because they don't do it, but it's just never been their role. Defensively, he's like, watching him reminds me of watching football growing up, and whether it's Champ Bailey or one of those shutdown corners to where, like, just don't even bring the ball over here. Like, just take it somewhere else and let's see what we can get over there. Rudy Gobert, and I'm glad you mentioned rim protection not being, because that whole paint area, like, if you shoot a floater over somebody, it's their rim protection doesn't mean much. But if they're able to get out and contest that floater, then it's a little different. Rudy Gobert does that. Rudy Gobert shuts off that whole paint area. And we mentioned really this whole episode about expectations being a key factor in why these players are so polarizing. And I think expecting a player of Rudy Gobert's size to get out there and switch on to guards like a Bam Adebayo or Nick Claxton or somebody who's smaller and Rudy Gobert is actually athletic himself, but smaller and more athletic. It's unrealistic. Everybody acknowledges how good Joel Embiid is defensively, but nobody expects him to go out and switch on to a guard and be successful at it. Rudy had to, because at times he was on teams where they just had no perimeter defenders at all, pretty much. And so that ended up looking kind of bad. And yes, they schemed him off the floor with Terrence Mann, but that's really kind of the only time that's ever happened. And really only one game where Terrence Mann kind of went off. And if you go back and look at a lot of those possessions, they weren't Rudy's fault.
Bingo. Like, literally. It's sometimes, like we say, basketball is a team thing. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times during that particularly that Clippers series, it was somebody not rotating to his man because he already pre-rotated to somebody else's man.
Yeah.
I will say this year, and also with the Jazz, obviously we're not talking about that Jazz team, but that Jazz team, he was literally their only paint protector or guy with size on the floor. I think the second tallest guy was Bogdanovich. Mm-hmm. So, obviously now fast forward to this year, he has Cat on the floor. Sometimes he has Naz Reid on the floor. Anthony Edwards, who is a freak of nature athletically. Yeah. Like he has what I'm trying to get at is he has size, so he's more willing to go out there, and it doesn't look as bad because it isn't as bad because he has some kind of weak side rim protection. He's also more willing to go out there because he has confidence on those in the team. But he impacts the game defensively in so many ways. It's ridiculous. Right.
So credit to him, man, because he never really gets it. And even with Minnesota being one of the best teams in basketball this year, largely because of him. I watched them against Brooklyn, and he wasn't out there, but their defensive principles still stand. But that is, and we can say very confidently, is a defense built around Rudy Gobert.
Yep.
And like you mentioned, him having the perimeter defenders to where now Anthony Edwards is a plus defender. He doesn't really get the credit he deserves as a defender, and he could be better, but he is a good defender. They got Jaden McDaniel out there. They got Nickeil Walker-Alexander. They really have the perimeter defenders to where Rudy Gobert can finally shine in his role. And we've seen it, and we see the results out there in Minnesota. And completely coincidentally, we did not do this on purpose. My player, my big, who is polarizing that I feel probably shouldn't really be, is Karl-Anthony Towns. Karl-Anthony Towns gets a bad rap for being quote-unquote soft. And I think that's another thing that just once again comes from people not watching the games, but letting other people's perception control theirs. Karl-Anthony Towns' whole style basically is bully ball. His whole thing, when he Euros, he's trying to hit you in the chest, and like he's trying to dunk on you. He's for his career, and I didn't even know until we started the show. He's averaging 23 and 11 for his career.
Yep.
This is not just like some standard issue double. 23 and 11 is tough. He calls himself the best shooting big in the league, and he's so polarizing that there was argument about that because of Dirk Nowitzki, which I understand. But I also remember Dirk Nowitzki's career and how often Dirk Nowitzki was criticized for not being a quote-unquote real big. And so when we talk about the center position, Karl-Anthony Towns is absolutely the best shooting big of all time. I don't think that's even a question. 3-point shooting at least.
Yep.
Defensively, up and down, I think. He's been good defensively lately. I won't deny that. But he offensively, he's somebody who can handle the ball, who can pass. We just talked about the shooting already. He can post you up efficiently. He moves awkwardly, so his athleticism kind of, you have to really pay attention to see his athleticism, but that's there.
Super fluid for somebody that big.
Yeah. So I guess if you're taking Jimmy Butler's side on their thing, which I don't care enough about to take sides, then maybe you have an issue with Karl-Anthony Towns. But aside from that, I've never really understood it. Because, again, all we care about is basketball on this show. And so I'm seeing a 7-footer cross people over and dunk. I'm seeing a 7-footer get out on fast breaks and windmill off one leg. I'm seeing a 7-footer shoot 40+% from three multiple times in his career. This year, his shooting splits 51, 43, 88.
Ridiculous.
As a 7-foot big. And so it's I've never fully understood the hate for Karl-Anthony Towns, but especially watching him recently in this season with the Timberwolves, with his numbers are also down, which another example of a team that's really trying to win, you're going to sacrifice your individual numbers. But he would, before Anthony Edwards really kind of took off and became that team's, you could say star or 1A or whatever it is, but Karl-Anthony Towns was usually around 24, 25, sometimes 26 points per game in his career. And so he's somebody who has kind of always, I don't even want to say had to prove himself, because he's already proven, in my opinion. And so I've just never understood it.
He doesn't get enough credit also for the role change that he had to do from basically being the center for the team for literally his whole career. And then insert Rudy Gobert, changes the scheme defensively. We know what he does. So now Towns has to change his way of defending. And he's done, again, he's not a lockdown defender, but his willingness and his effort on that side of the floor is not to be understated, because it's definitely helped the team. Offensively, we know who he is. Like you said, career 40% three-point shooter.
Crazy.
Oh, yeah, over 50% from the field, 52.5% for the field from his career, 84% free throw shooter. Yes, he can shoot the fucking leather off the basketball. A good facilitator for his size. I think he's a very good passer for his size. The reason he's so polarizing is A, expectations, B, the Jimmy incident, and honestly, some of the playoff struggles, particularly versus some smaller guys, which is where the soft thing comes from. He's not an elite, like that's not his game. He does play bully ball and he does like to bully, but sometimes it could be to the detriment of the team. But this year he's really honed in on, working himself into and out of those situations, and when being more selective on when he should go and when he shouldn't go, just impacting the game in different ways. And a truly a very, like you said, a very polarizing player, but somebody who, when it's all said and done, most people who are hating on him, which is what we started the show doing, they're going to have to respect him at some point, because he is that good of a basketball player. There's a reason he went number one. He's literally proven it every single year of his career. Never averaged less than 18 points per game. That is ridiculous. That alone should tell you just the talent that this man has. But he's been sensational this year. Truly, his whole career, he's been sensational and just one of the best shooting bigs ever, like you stated, man. I don't know. I don't know how people can just sit there and honestly just not enjoy him play basketball sometimes. Like, the preconceived notions, the narratives are so strong sometimes with him that you really just can't sit there and just watch and enjoy the freak that is Karl-Anthony Towns when he plays basketball. Because he is literally a freak. 7 feet with the moves a little funky, but the fluidness of a 7-footer, he doesn't have, like, he doesn't move like a 7-footer. He moves like somebody who's probably like 6'8", 6'9", dribbles the ball very well, like finishes, has an arsenal, 3-level score. He's literally a 3-level scorer, and just truly elite at what he does. So definitely Karl.
And credit to him, because I mentioned in like the Tyler Herro section, there aren't a lot of actual 3-level scorers, and like that's a very difficult one. The mid-range game is kind of frowned upon anyway. So even if you could be a 3-level scorer, you're probably just not allowed to be. Jeff Teague told a story about he shot a mid-range game, mid-range shot in the game, made it, and his coach was still pissed off. So that's the kind of stuff happens. So credit to Karl-Anthony Towns for being a 3-level scorer, and also with the shooting and the passing, how much that opens up for a Rudy Gobert, who we just talked about. everybody's favorite young player in Anthony Edwards. That opening up the driving lane for him to do the things we love to see him do. And that Minnesota team, credit to Karl-Anthony Towns, one, because he does get criticism for his playoff struggles, but a lot of those teams kind of had no business in the playoffs anyway. And it's a similar thing with the criticism Tracy McGrady gets, to where, all right, but look at the roster. Like, they're not really even supposed to be there. Like, yeah, they're going to hone in on him and he's going to struggle. Like, he doesn't have much help out there. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Playoff File. I'm Kenny. Find my social media, KennySpenceNBA. I don't care if you follow it or not. Follow and subscribe to Playoff File on everything. Lou, what you got?
At Saucy Takes, no spaces, takes with the Z at the end, on mostly Twitter, man. Trying to get to 500 followers, so it'd be pretty dope if you guys can obviously help me out. And subscribe to, like, comment, share, leave a comment, tell your favorite cousin, tell your least favorite cousin about Playoff File. Whoever, just let the people know, man.
Yeah, and if you like the music throughout, that's my brother. His Instagram and TikTok are BlackGlowMusic. Follow him on there. We'll see y'all next time.